Now, if I were on a queen size, king size, twin size, whatever size quilt, I would. So again, once you have this amazing border with that filler that we talked about. Again, these are missing the echo. Hello my Patreon family, and welcome back to the Quilters Apothecary. Today we are doing a special border treatment utilizing the In Cahoots Tidal Wave ruler that my dear Sue Heinz and myself have designed. And a lot of you had seen the earlier video on the medallions and how to use it in the middle of a block, and you wrote us and said, okay, talk to us about how to use this in a border. And what I thought is that I would combine this in a special series that I've been formulating on how to utilize the Mystical Shape series in borders. So this is going to be the first part of that special mini series of designs. So how we're going to do this is we're going to draw this design, and then in other episodes we're going to do some other of the shapes in borders. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go to the machine and we're going to have a couple special episodes where we're going to be quilting these out so you see exactly how they quilt out. Now they're going to quilt out exactly as we draw them out. And of course, as always, I suggest that you always draw them on paper, poster board, whatever works for you. You can get the rolls of paper on a table so that you can get the feel of how it would look in a border first before you actually move to the machine, because however it draws is exactly how it's going to quilt. So enough of that, let's go down to the paper and let's see how this design works. Okay, so let's do a little refresher. The shape we're going to be utilizing today for this border treatment is, of course, the tidal waves. And they are these wonderful shapes that you've seen before. And we're going to get started here. So what I've decided to do, just because I've drawn out a small piece for the drawing, so you get the idea of how to work through the process on poster board, we're going to utilize the smaller versions of that particular shape. We'll set those aside. Okay, so of course here we have a very small border, of course, but you'll see how that design is worked out on the quilt, and then you can go ahead and give it a try. So now I have a 6-inch border, and what I've done is I've divided it in half, so I have my middle mark. The next thing I would do as I work through my border is I would then go ahead and take those measurements. Now this is on the inner border, and I would continue to mark those in half. So of course I have my half mark here. I had measured between the two, and I had located the half mark between the two on both sides. Now, if I were on a queen size, king size, twin size, whatever size quilt, I would just keep dividing those spaces in half. Now, how far do you go? Well, for me, what I'm going to do, because we're on a small poster board, is I'm probably going to use my corners and my middle. If I were on a little bit of a bigger border, I would then use the two middles here. If I were on a standard or a queen size, I would divide those in half again a few times to add those in. What I'm going to try to do is to make sure that I put my motif, and you'll see as we move through this design, put enough motifs in here not to scrunch together on the edges, and we're going to be using the inner edge as well as the outer edge. And that's taken into account. Of course, you would have seen the picture of what this looks like when it's finished at the beginning of the video. So to get there, we just want to decide how many motifs go on the inner portion of the seam and then the outer edge of the quilt. Now the one thing that I want to add is I always make sure to put in my 1/4 inch seam allowance on the inner edge of the quilt for my binding. I want to take that into account so that I'm not cutting that design short by putting my binding on the outer edge. Okay, so now again I have my middle here. What I'd like to do is I'm simply going to line up and flip that around, get my mark there. I'm just going to put a registration line. So I'm going to line this up so that I have my line going across the seam. I have my mark halfway through. I'm just going to put a little registration mark there. I am also, at that point, if this were a bigger quilt, would go to the edge. I would put a registration line here, and then I would go between and I would put a registration line here. Now, because this piece is so small, let me get my other side here. Because this piece is so small, as far as on a poster board piece of paper, compared to the size of our ruler, we want to utilize this middle line, because a lot of you would say, well, how come you needed to measure in here if you're not going to use this space? Because what I want to do on this outer area is stagger what I have going on the inner. So I'm going to line this up. And again, bear with me. Once you watch this, it'll make total sense. We're going to put that line there. Come over here. Put this line here. And then, of course, you would have already done it down the sides before you loaded the quilt. Or you would base the sides of your quilt and then turn the quilt, or come back and do that after the quilt is complete. This is one of the designs that I will either turn or base the sides and then come back and do them after the quilt is complete. What I would have done is folded all four sides, located the center, and put a chalk mark on the middle of all four borders in case I weren't going to turn, but I were going to roll back and forth. That just makes it a lot easier. Now, so we have our marks here. What we're going to do is grab our shape, and I'm going to grab our smallest shape in the Tidal Wave series ruler. And when you look at this, of course, what we want to see, let me get you down further. You were already introduced to this, but let me redo it. As we see the center here, we see these registration marks coming out. And so what I'm focused on is this quarter. So right now I'm focused on this bottom left quarter that you see right there. I'm going to take that. Let's go out. And I am going to go to the corner. I'm going to put the center dot that's there right on the corner, line that up. Now, this is one of those designs that, frankly, you would just go ahead and quilt. Or, if you wanted to pre-mark it, you would grab one of your little circles with the pencil hole or whatever marking tool you use. They have the 3 different sizes, so the marks be gone if it's a white border, or they have the thinner or a little bit thicker for the Bowen chalk pencils. So they have those tools if you want to pre-mark, that you would just put it right against here and go right around it to get that exact quilting line. But we're going to go ahead and just mark because we're talking about the design itself and what it's going to look like. I'm going to block my stitches, travel here, go around, all the way. Okay, so now I have that one in place. That's simply the base. Let me get rid of my little extra mark there. I wish it were that easy when we sew. Okay, now I'm going to go to the middle, and again we're going to go right to the middle mark, right on the middle. We look at that horizontal line going across. On that design, I also look at the design that's coming up vertically through the center. And now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to quilt, or draw in this case, that half. Now I'm going to take it and I'm going to slide it over here. Now, what you would be doing if this were a wider quilt is you would be going to all of your marks. If it were, let's say, a queen size quilt, king size quilt, you would do the corner, and then you would slide down to the next mark and do the next mark and the next mark and the next mark. Remember though, you're going to alternate to every other line because you want this nice little space in between. If I were to go right here and put one here, would it be horrible? It certainly wouldn't be horrible, but I feel like it's just a little much for this particular size. Let's say this was for a wall hanging. This is exactly the distance that I would go between. So now I'm going to head over to the other side. I'm going to line that up. Again, quarter in. So I'm going to give myself my 3/4 design here, right in the corner. Now within your throat space, if you had marked down the side, and we're going to do the sides as you go, you might have room for another one in that section. In this case, we do not. Now, what about these alternate lines? So on these alternate lines, what I'm going to do is slide those over on the top portion. So here would be the top edge, or in this case, the bottom edge of your quilt. And I would do the same thing that we did up here, but do it alternating so it's perfectly centered between what's happening down here, which gives a nice visual effect. It's very pleasing to the eye when we offset things 50%. Okay, so now we've got those bones in place. Now what about our corners? So we want to look at our outer corners and we want to repeat the same process. So if this were here on this part of the outer corner getting 3/4, and when we go up here, of course, we would go to 1/4. So we would take that to 1/4. Take that to 1/4. Okay, so now we have everything in place as far as our base. So now the next thing that I want to do is this. I want to look at the design and say, okay, is that all I want? Or would I like to use the next size up and go in there and do an echo? And again, because this is a size up, all I would do is find my middle and echo around there and put an extra little frame. But what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to use the exact same one that I've already used. I'm going to line that up right in the center there. And what's wonderful is we have with the registration marks here. And here, let me insert a little bit of a photo so that you can see, and it's on colored fabric so you can see the marks as they appear on the ruler. It's hard to see it on the white paper. And you can see that there are wonderful marks that we formulated so that it's easy to locate the center when you offset it here and here. And then those are there, and so then I would simply mark my tips. Mark my tips, mark my tips, mark tips, and then do the same thing on all of these. Again, locate my center. My center is here. Line up here. Make sure that that lines up on the horizontal. And so I'm going to do this with all my halves, all of my quarters.
And when you're sewing that, you're doing the lock and drag?
So if I were sewing this, I would be doing the lock and drag. Now again, you don't have to pre-mark before you sew. I like to do that just because I like to then locate exactly where I'm going to be when I'm sewing, and it just makes it a little bit easier, but you don't have to. And you could do the drag and drop, drag and lock. So here is where I put my original line. Now I'm going to offset it, just like that. So there's our quarters. Now we're going to go over to our 3/4 and do the same thing. We have our 3/4. Going to pivot that, line it up. Again, I've got my quarter line there. We can see that we're perfect with our pivot. I can take advantage of the fact that I'm only drawing this right now. As a lot of you have found that have received this particular shape set, is it's pretty versatile. It does some amazing things. So I'm going to go ahead and finish all of these, and we'll come back and we'll do the next step. So of course we could just utilize this as a wonderful base for moving forward, but I don't want to do that. I want to take you some steps ahead to make it a little more fancy, and then you make it as simple or as complex as you choose to do. So I'm going to add another shape inside each of these just to take it a step further. And I'm going to choose a shape, and in this case it's simply going to be a circle. You could use a diamond shape, you could use the tip of a star, you could use the tip of a hexagon, any shape you want. For this I'm simply going to be using a circle, and of course a lot of you have the inner circle puzzle piece sets so that you would quilt this exact size. But right now we're going to mark it like we're quilting it. So again, I go right back to my halvesies. So I've got that right on the line there. In fact, let me go down here, make this just a little more easy for you to understand what I'm doing. So I'm taking this circle, I'm lining it halfway up, centered in this motif, and then of course I've got this lined up perfect. I would be putting the inner. I would use 2 quilting circles for that. Use the inner and the outer, at least in this case. Now I've put half of feathered wreaths. I've done different things on the inside of these, as we saw in the block design. So now we have a little bit more of a complex, modern, industrial type of a shape in this with this design. So now I would go over here, and now I would line up 3/4. So I've got my quarter piece of pie, everything's lined up. I have my outside, and then my inside. Now this is definitely one of the reasons why we want to have access to those smaller circle quilting tools. You know, of course we have the inside circle set, which works perfect for this, from sizes, is it a 1/4 inch, Mr. Ritchie? So finished quilting size would be, I believe, or is it 1/2 inch?
1/2 inch.
1/2 inch up to 3 inches, every 1/2 inch, which works perfect for quilting these perfect circle shapes.
And there are some quarter sizes in there. You'd be getting 3/4 inch.
Yeah, there are some quarter sizes. There are some 3/4 and 1.25 inches in our set as well. So there's that part. So now you can see the inside. I'm sorry, let me zoom out. Okay, and so now same thing out here. I go to the half. The thing is, remember, we're not going to the edge of the quilt. We're going to the mark that we made, which was a 1/4 inch in. And again, I'm assuming that we are dealing with 1/4 inch binding. If you have somebody that does 1/2 inch binding, then you have to take that into account. Now, in my binding space, I would just go ahead and continue quilting that, but I would make sure that the half is what's left out there. Same thing for this. I would have quilted out to the outer edge, just because that's what we need to do to keep that edge stable. We don't want ruffling. So now, there's that. There's that. Now we would take it over to the corner. Again, I want to go to the 1/4 mark and mark that and that. And already what you can see here is we have a lot of areas with potential for our negative quilting. And I forgot my inner guy there. So that. Go over to this corner. That. There's that. Okay, so now we have our shapes in there. Now, before we think about what's going to be going on out here, let's talk about the design itself. Obviously, there are lots of choices on what you could choose to fill here. But what about, and this would be plenty right here. But one of the things that I find is whatever I'm going to put out here, I don't want to blend in too closely with this, because I put a little bit of extra time into these motifs around there, and so I really want them to come to life. So one of the best ways to do that would be, of course, with an echo. Now, when I'm talking a little bit about the echo, what I want to add here is I have the size up from the smaller size that we used. I could even go one size bigger than that to do even a bigger echo, and that would be pretty awesome, which is something you can play with as you mark these out. But I want to keep it fairly simple because I want to show you a little tip. When you are doing your echo, let's say you've quilted these motifs already, so these are quilted. When I go to do my echo, I would use that add a 1/4 tool that we talked about, the little circle, and there's in the sets of 3 there are different different sizes for whatever marking tool, whether you are using the Bowen, whether you are using the Marks Be Gone, or whether you are using the little Bowen with the that's more like a pencil line. So I'm going to use my next size up. I'm going to go right here. I'm going to mark this or chalk this. Even if, let's pretend these are all quilted. These are quilted. I'm going to mark it using that tool to get my exact sewing line. I'm going to go down. I don't have to go all the way. I'm going to go out on the echo. Remember, I put this dead center here because we've got an echo, and I have made sure that my horizontal line through the center is on the seam line. Put this here, put this here, and there is a reason why I want to mark this first, because it's going to make it easier when we sew this echo. Now notice that what I have here, it's not a full echo. I'm only marking the tips, because remember we pivoted this once, and so to get that exact echo, now I would take this and I would pivot it. Again, line that up in the center. We've got those extra lines that we showed in that picture earlier. And now I'm going to go ahead. Let's get that lined up perfect. And fill in to get our complete echo. All the way around. All the way around. And now when I move that, I simply get rid of my lines. If I'm using my chalk, if I'm using my marks, be gone. Just be aware of those extra lines. And now I have that perfect echo that goes around. So now when we go in here and we decide, which I wouldn't do until after this whole quilt is complete, when the whole quilt is complete, I would come back to the border section and I would decide what am I going to put micro work in, because that would be, of course, what I would be doing. I would leave, I think for me, this part right here, I would leave blank, which means I would put filler here. And I wouldn't put filler here, here, or here. So I would put it here. I'm sorry, I would put it here, and I would put it on the outer edge. So the echo would also have that fill. As seen here. Let me insert a photo. So then you have that motif here. Let's zoom back out. Okay, so now you have those motifs highlighting the inner and the outer edge of this wonderful border treatment. And now it's about, okay, so what's going to happen in here? Well, absolutely anything that we've normally done could be added here. One of the examples of what could be done is we could start from the corner. We've done this before in our border treatments, and do 45 degrees all the way in, which would give a wonderful effect with this. But again, that's dependent upon what's going on in the body of that quilt. If there are a lot of angles, angled piecing in the body of that quilt, then maybe 45 degree would definitely fight with that. So maybe what you'd want to do instead is just stick to simple piano keys. So there are a few choices here of what we could actually utilize, and that is how you would proceed. Now obviously there are even more choices than that. You could drop some motifs here. You could put crosshatch, 45 degree crosshatch in this border, which would be cool because these motifs would absolutely pop with that wonderful echo. But let's go ahead and let's focus on, let's say, piano keys. So if I were going to do piano keys, of course we would want to start from our outer edge here and work in. So let me grab my straight ruler, and let's say an inch. Let's say we're going to use an inch. So I would, and let's go to our original line here. So piano key. Now, we could also pinstripe. So let's pinstripe. We could do our regular piano keys, but let's do our pinstripe. And again, my pinstripe is always going to work from the corner into the center, from the corner into the center. So now we've got our piano key. Now remember, we're going to pretend that we've already done our echo around all of the motifs. And then an inch. Quarter inch. And again, you have to take into account any of the little areas where it would sneak behind. And then an inch. Quarter of an inch. This was our registration line for the other part. Let's get rid of those. Those don't count now. That landed almost perfect right on that other line, which is normally not the case. Okay, so the other thing, as we work our way over, the one thing that we want to stay away from, we want to avoid Eileen. So as we put our lines in there, we're not just using the lines we're making. We also use our horizontal lines to line up with the seam, so that optically, we don't need that. Everything works out visual. Yep, I would go ahead and add that little guy in there. Okay, so here is our center line. I can do one of two things, and let's start with simply lining that up, getting that there. Now I'm going to start from our other side and work our way in. Quarter inch, inch. And notice this time I'm doing something a little different than how I normally do it, and that is I'm doing my corner piano key, and instead of going inch, 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 and then coming back and marking a quarter inch beyond that, I'm just going ahead and marking my inch and then my quarter inch as I go. Both ways work. The key is don't forget your little beadboard. If you're going to do beadboard, don't forget that, otherwise you have to remark the rest of them going in because you'll be a quarter inch off. See, that did hit it perfect. But mathematically, that's not always the case. And again, as I make my line, I want to make sure to line up a horizontal there and keep that corrected as I move my way from the corner into the quilt. Okay, so now we've worked our way around, and of course, yes, you would go ahead mark your, let me glance up at the monitor, make sure I'm in line there since I can't see over the edge of the ruler. Mark that, and you have a choice here in the corner. You could plant some sort of special motif there, or you could simply do the fan design where you take that in, corner, and then very simply you would measure that, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 1, 2, 3, 1.5, 1.5, and you could go to the corner and mark your fan design right in the corner of that. Again, you're pivoting from this point here And then you would do the same thing down the side, which would match this. So then you have it going and working its way around. Now what I might do is I might leave these two blank. You could echo 1/4 inch, and when I say echo 1/4 inch, you could here, but up here take it to the 1/4 inch. So you get that ray, that double ray kind of effect. Take it to a 1/4 inch, but keep this pivot right here. And then what I would do is here, I would keep it right in the corner here, take it to a 1/4 inch on that side, but then also take it to a 1/4 inch on that side. That way you get those really interesting pinstripes that are coming from radiating from the middle out like a fan. So again, that is another one of the options. You could leave this center as a single, or you could take it into a triple. As I keep saying to everybody, and this is so important as you're building your portfolio, is draw this more than once so that you have all of these different options that you can look at and say, okay, I like this one, or this one. So again, once you have this amazing border with that filler that we talked about. Again, these are missing the echo, this echo like we have here. But you can kind of see as well, this works, this looks wonderful, there's nothing wrong with this, but I do really love that echoed outer line there. It just adds a lot to the design. So for that, I have to say that is one way to play with that wonderful ruler in borders. And then of course you could also look at some sashes and work with it a little bit in sashes and do some really great stuff. And remember, coming down the line with this particular series, we're going to be doing a bunch of different shape ideas. And you can apply any shape to this particular style that we just did here. You could do that with circles. You could do that with half the diamonds, depending on the size of the diamond. You choose wisely the size, and you could use half hexes. There are lots of different ways you could apply that same technique inside of a border and come up with some amazing, magical looking borders for your quilt. All right, as always, I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you join us down the road when we will be quilting this as well as some of the other options we'll be coming up with in this series out on the machine. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. We'll see you all later. Goodbye, everybody.